This is a version of the talk on the Book of Lismore and Acallam Senórach, which was given earlier in the term as part of the school seminar of Scoil Léan na Gaeilge in UCC. Acallam Senórach, a title that is generally translated as the Colloquy of the Ancients, is the single largest medieval Irish text. It is written in the combination of prose and poetry referred to as prosimetrum. It is the central narrative in the literary cycle, focused on Finn MacColl, on his Fian, his warrior band, on his son Oisin, and on his grandson Oscar. The tale is constructed on the premise that a small number of the Fian of Ireland, under the leadership of Cuilche mac Rónán and Oisin mac Finn, have survived for centuries into the era of St. Patrick. In the Acallam, we see these revenants wandering through the landscape in the company of the saint, describing life in the heyday of the Fian under Finn MacColl. As has been argued previously, it is not too much to claim that the Acallam stands at the conclusion of the cultivation of early Finiacht materials and represents a high watermark of achievement within this tradition and within Gaelic culture generally. The Acallam is the single largest text in the Book of Lismore, occupying approximately 1/5 of the entire manuscript. And in the slide here on the screen, one can see the top half of the opening page of the tale on folio 201 recto. Miles Dillon argued some years ago that just as Chaucer is the beginning for many students of English literature, so the Acallam may be the upper limit of a programme for modern Irish. Lately, academic consensus has been moving towards a date circa 1225 for the Acallam. However, the most recent scholar to address the topic, Caoimhín Breathnach, has claimed that its date of composition is still uncertain, arguing that linguistically he can see no reason why it could not have been written in the first half of the early modern Irish period. He modifies this position by continuing, "It is also possible, of course, that an original text, dating to the Middle Irish period, may have been modernised in the course of its transmission." The Book of Lismore, which dates to the late 15th century, is one of 5 manuscripts to contain a copy of Acallam na Senórach, and this is to be found on folios 201 recto to folio 42 verso. The other codices are the Bodleian Library, Oxford, Laud Manuscript 610, 15th century, which you will find online at that address mentioned there. The Bodleian Library, Oxford Manuscript, Rawlinson 487, another 15th century manuscript, which is not as yet available online. Then the late 15th century Book of Lismore, followed then by UCD Library Franciscan Manuscript A4, a 15th or 16th century, 15th, 16th century manuscript, and finally UCD Library Franciscan Manuscript A20A, a 17th century manuscript, and both of these two are online on the ISOS website. Now, it has been shown that manuscript A20A is a later and faithful copy of manuscript A4. Now, the Laud 610 text forms the basis of the edition by Whitley Stokes, supplemented by material from the Book of Lismore and from Franciscan A4. The Book of Lismore text has been printed in extenso by Standishes O'Grady, and selections from it have also been published by Miles Dillon. The other manuscript texts remain as yet unpublished. Stokes employed Laud 610 as the basis of his edition whenever its text was available to him, referring to its extant fragments as older and better than the others, and he generally used the Book of Lismore as the source of the rest of the text, with extra material added from Franciscan Manuscript A4. I have undertaken a detailed analysis of one brief episode in the Acallam concerned with the healing pig, the Muchlonga, and I give you the piece there on on the slide from the Book of Lismore. And the analysis I've undertaken suggests that the Laud 610 and Book of Lismore narratives are textually closer than the other manuscripts, sharing more unique readings. However, although the orthography in the Laud 610 text of the Acallam is generally more conservative, not infrequently the Book of Lismore has better readings. Now, the Book of Lismore also contains the only early copy of an Acallam Yog. It begins initially on folio 134, verse A1, where it breaks off. And you can see this on the left-hand side of the slide. And it begins again on folio 194, recto A1, and it goes on to folio 200, verso B. And the opening of the second version of the second telling of it is to be found on the right-hand side there of the slide. It is also to be found, of course, in later manuscript copies of the Book of Lismore. This version of the Acallam is thought to be similar or slightly later in date than the earlier Acallam na Senórach. As Nasni Hay points out, the title, Acallam Yog, is not found in any manuscript, but the usage goes back to an article by W. M. Hennessy, where he refers to the tract called the Acallam Yog, or Little Dialogue, contained in the Book of Lismore. The name has cleaved to the piece since. Now, this text, the Acallam Yog, is much shorter than the older recension of the Acallam, though it contains some material, much of it poetry, not found in the earlier narrative. Now, the identity of the main scribe of the Book of Lismore is as yet unknown. However, we know that Angus Acallam was responsible for folios 132 to 134 and folios 194 to 201. Thus he wrote the Acallam Yog both times, and also the first folio of the earlier Acallam. Now, the text of an Acallam Yog has been discussed in the Book of Lismore, has been discussed in detail by Pádraig Ó Machaon, who suggests that the delay involved in the change of ink, and you can see this on the left-hand page there, folio 134 verso, that this delay involved in the change of ink from brown to black at the start of the first attempt may have facilitated a scribal change of mind. The plausible suggestion is that Acallam continued with the Acallam Yog to the point that just enough space was left at the bottom of folios 134 recto and 134 verso to write down the text on Ceann Fáilid, and so that the main scribe could begin the story about A. Bachlav at the top of a new folio, that is at 135 recto A. Now, outside of these two versions, there is also a later version of the narrative, which is known under its modernised title as Acallam na Senórach, and which is dated to circa 1400 by its editor Nasni Hay. In this version, Oisín, rather than Caoilte, is the central character. Ní Hay's text incorporates within it all of the text of an Acallam Yog. It also contains very many additional episodes and poems from the earlier Acallam, alongside materials from oral tradition and from other written sources which no longer survive. Following Douglas Hyde, this version is frequently referred to as the Reeves Acallam, as Hyde called the sole manuscript in which it is to be found, that is RAA manuscript 24p5, he called it the Reeves manuscript, after Bishop William Reeves, from whose library it came to the Royal Irish Academy. Thus we can see immediately that the Book of Lismore is a crucial witness to the Acallam tradition, as one of the oldest witnesses to the earlier Acallam, and, outside of later copies of the Book of Lismore, the sole witness to an Acallam Yog. With regard to an Acallam Yog, only part of this text has been published by Douglas Hyde nearly 100 years ago, and this portion was subsequently translated a few years later by Walter Pennington. A full edition and translation has been completed by Julia Koons in a 2006 thesis, but this has not yet been published. Now, statistics assembled by Nulligam Rila about these three versions of the Acallam are illuminating. The older Acallam na Senórach is composed of approximately 70,000 words, of which 55,000 in prose and roughly 15,000 in poetry. An Acallam Yog has only 12,500 words, half in prose, half in poetry. That is roughly 6,500 in prose and 6,000 in poetry. Whereas the later Acallam of Senórach is 50% as long again as the earlier Acallam, containing approximately 104,000 words, with approximately 73,000 in prose and 31,000 in poetry. Now, with regard to the older version of the Acallam, Laud's manuscript 610 regularly has more conservative orthography and often attests better readings, but it is wanting the opening 2,044 lines as well as a further 500 lines throughout. The Book of Lismore frequently preserves superior readings, but it is missing over 1,440 lines, or 18% of the total narrative. It is also in bad physical condition, with significant parts of the text stained and hard to read. Rawlinson B487 frequently abbreviates the narrative, often paraphrasing or omitting the shorter poems. The Franciscan A4 witness frequently has additional poetry, which is not present in the other manuscripts, either through loss of leaves there or because these poems never form part of these versions. To take just a couple of examples. Only the first line of the poem beginning Alia Valig Ahi, O Stone of Balach Ahi, is preserved in the Book of Lismore, where it is followed by Et Reliqua. The portion of the Laud manuscript is missing, and the poem is also not present in Rawlinson B487. When one compares this with Stokes' edition, however, we find that he has a poem of 3 quatrains transcribed at this point from the Franciscan A4 text of the Acallam, which reads, and I'll give you the translation here from Dooley and Rowe, O stone of the pass at Attai, many are meetings there. The treasures of Shanach, son of Melcro, were found here. No mistake. Here are herbs for you, not without their charm. There are not found in the whole world women more pleasing to men. I shall tell you of it, my prophecy is true. All who know me know this, dear to me, this stone. Similarly, the Franciscan A4 manuscript contains a single verse beginning on Fert Phil Fon League Lodon, the grave which is under the stone of Lodon, put into the Mount of Quilce. This is not present in Laud, as this portion of the text is missing, and it is also completely absent from the other witnesses. The verse reads, The grave under Lodon stone, the grave of a man of proud birth, small grave of a glorious soldier, Arnielach, son of Ivalon. And one final example, the poem beginning Daini Badr son Goshe, people who were here until now, is not present in Laud 610 and consists of 4 verses in the Book of Lismore. In his edition, however, Stokes prints an additional 15 verses of the poem, inserted between quatrains 3 and 4, from Franciscan manuscript A4. Again, showing how additional materials, often in the form of poetry, are to be found in this codex. Interestingly, having checked through the editions of Stokes and O'Grady, where Laud and Lismore are both witnesses to the text, I have not come across any example of additional verses in Lismore. However, in the opening 2,044 lines, which are not in Laud, there are a number of poems which are only to be found in the Lismore manuscript of the Acallam. Among these we may enumerate a poem of 6 quatrains beginning Eirik Sus a Oscar, Rise Up Oscar, which I'll read now for you from Dooley and Rowe's translation. Rise up, Oscar, and show them who you are. Though heroes stand before you, 100 keep at bay. Charge back and forth till their necks be headless. Seize your fine green shield, grasp your sharpened sword. Take shield and javelins from the warrior you have slain. Take a cuirass to shield you, that your onset may not fail. A great event for me, with witnesses at hand, the giving of my child at the age of 9. One shall never come, better of hand or oath, no spear shaft that further shall penetrate a man. Woe to the man to whom he bears his sharpened sword, when angrily his arm strikes in fierce attack. Interestingly, a slightly different copy of this poem is found independently of the Acallam in Dúnar Féin. Similarly, there is another poem of 10 quatrains beginning Alva Laigin Lisnovian, Alva of Laigin, stronghold of the Fianna, which is only to be found in the Lismore copy of the Acallam. Again, a different and fuller version of this poem, with the same initial line, is to be found as part of the metrical Linyanicus, titled Alva Ahéan. Significantly, at this point in the Rawlinson manuscript, a witness, as we have already mentioned, which frequently omits the poetry, there is a version of the first line of a different and shorter poem from the metrical Linyanicus, where there it is titled Alva Adó. Now, such examples highlight a very pertinent point about the Acallam. No single witness contains the complete narrative, and all have materials not preserved in the other codices. Furthermore, as well as including poems which were originally independent of the Acallam before being incorporated into it, we also have, as already noted, constituent poems of the Acallam which have independent lives outside of the narrative. Thus, and in conclusion, we may say that the Book of Lismore is a crucial witness to the Acallam tradition, both Acallam na Senórach and an Acallam Bheag. It holds centre stage with regard to the latter, as the sole manuscript to contain the text outside of the later copies of it. With regard to the former, Acallam na Senórach, it contains unique text of the Acallam not present elsewhere, especially where the testimony of Laud 610 is absent. This manuscript, the Book of Lismore, and the text of the Acallam it contains, will form a central part of any critical edition of the narrative that might be attempted in the future. Gurna Míle Maith Agaibh.